we'll get going in just a second.
Nasty day.
It's about 12:15 on my record. I don't know if y'all got your accurate GPS.
If you come back,
And we may have a few other folks come in. With the weather being what it is, just glad you're here. I hate to have to eat all that cake squares myself, so the staff's already figuring out who gets to do what. So you may get to take home a cake square with you today, for that matter. My name's Eric Elliott, and I have been since July 10th the interim archivist here at Moravian Archives. How many have been to a program here before? Excellent. I sort of need to preach a little to the choir, because then I don't want the choir to help preach about the good news about this place to other folks as well. So I wanted to give you my perspective on things in my brief tenure since July 10th of this year. Perspective is an interesting thing. August, I went down to just below Lawrence on the Seneca River and looked up, and for a brief moment, well, about 3 minutes worth of moments, the solar eclipse happened. Full solar eclipse. It's the same sun that you and I see every day, but for those 3 minutes you saw it in a completely different light or lack thereof, and the corona around it. From a different perspective, here's what the sun looks like from outer space with a zoom camera. That orange blob has all these fascinating things that are happening in fire and flame to it. Come on in the back. Earth to scale. It's all a matter of perspectives. In 1770, perspectives on this neck of the woods were just getting settled. We'd had the Wachovia settlement going for almost 20 years, but they were still learning about what was the countryside like. And it always amazes me, I'm a map person, so the ability to visualize in a 2D way 3D walks and travel records. This is before satellites and GPS, and we're so spoiled rotten now. But what a real talent to visualize the landscape. Here's Salem over here, and the mountains, and Mount Ararat, which we now know is Pilot Mountain. A little bit later, 1806, here's a map of the southeast as the Tennessee frontier is expanding. And what I find interesting about this map for purposes of this collection, you know, we've got this Records of the Cherokee series that we're doing. And the route from Salem down to work with the Cherokee in Georgia had nothing to do with Interstate 40. We went up from Salem to Abington, Virginia, and down that side of the mountains and came across here to go work with the Cherokee in northern Georgia. This is 1806. By 1818, over here on the left, the spot where we were working in Georgia makes the map, but it makes the map known in a way which is very practical when you're doing things at a distance. This is where Chief Van lives. And in fact, our Spring Place mission was on Chief Van's estate on Diamond Hill. So you have Vans there in the 1818 map of northern Georgia. And 8 years later, you have up the road Ross, which was Chief Ross's place. And that actually became the gathering point for many of the Cherokee on the Trail of Tears a dozen years later. But it's all about perspective, what you want to relay. We had an expert guy at relaying information here in Wachovia with Reuter. You've seen many of his maps. What precision. This was wilderness, and he was able to lay out in precise grid form the lay of the land. And he also had an artistic bent to him. I loved going over to Bethabara. They had this on the wall. And when I first moved to town in the early, well, I guess I came in just after the storms in '89 when I first came to Winston-Salem. And it wasn't long after that I went over to Bethabara and found this map which shows in rather dramatic, bold fashion where the Moravian communities were in the world. And up here is Wachovia. This is Reuter writ large, just doing his thing. You do have to have a perspective somewhat grounded in the reality of a place. The initial plan for where we're sitting today, Salem, looked like this. This was Isidor's idea for the town of Unitas, which would be the center of Wachovia, and it was a circle, which does great if you're in Kansas or on the Utah Bonneville Flats. Not so good at the Piedmont when you went ups and downs. And that's where we end up having our more realistic Salem Square and Salem layout today. What's my perspective? Well, if you knew me growing up, and I'll only show you these briefly, I did like to read and write, and crazy me did have a nice, happy childhood. But you may not have guessed that I would have an interest in history. It was the worst grade I had at Chapel Hill the first year, and I suddenly went from being a science major to doing more and more stuff to show that I could do this thing. The crazy thing about being a historian was there wasn't one right answer. You were supposed to argue with as much information and argument about the past. Completely different way of thinking. When I moved to Winston-Salem, I had a chance in about 10 years to live in West End. There's a Grace Court clock in West End that we put in 1999 to celebrate the sesquicentennial of Forsyth County. That's the first time I ran into the works of Adelaide Fries and folks from this archive. This book, Forsyth County, A History of a County on the March, was probably one of her last works in '48. And it got me connected to Ed Hendricks at Wake Forest, and we started talking about where could you find stuff about the history of this place. I'm not from here. And one of the places he suggested was come to the Moravian Archives. When I was in West End, I had a chance to try to save some homes. We did tourist brochures for about 10 years, which got a lot of people interested in the things beyond the whole landscape of housing there. And it had a few pictures from the public library and from Moravian Archives, and it led to a book about West End, which you can still get on Amazon today. And we had put up a sign where the old Hotel Zinzendorf was, thanks to work that came from research done in part here at this archive. And then I had a chance a few years later to work on the history of the Fries family. And down at the Brookstown Inn, we have a display that's set up about the 80-foot of wall that has pictures and stories about the Fries family's role in basically ending Old Salem and beginning New Winston. That's what it amounts to. And the Fries family, this is Mr. Willingham and the descendants from Francis Fries's folks, and we got together in 2014 to celebrate their family's history in connection to this place. I'm not a Moravian, though. So my perspective is going to be a little different on your materials than yours. But that's not a bad thing. It helps to have different perspectives. If we've just seen different perspectives help us show different things about things. I taught Sunday school for 20 years. I did get a chance in '88, when I was a considerable number of stone lighter, to go visit where Luther translated into German the Bible in Eisenach. But I'm not the first Moravian, first Methodist to hang out with Moravians. You know the story of the very first Methodist. And his initial encounter with Moravians in 1735, when John Wesley was on a boat headed to Georgia. They ran into bad weather. Bad weather on the ocean is a really bad thing in 1735. Water starts coming into the ship while the Moravians are having one of their Stingstundas. And the Moravians just don't miss a beat. They keep singing. And Wesley is going, aren't you all scared? We're going to drown. We don't worry about things. Death doesn't bother us. We're okay. Wesley, 3 years later, of course, had his Aldersgate experience at a Moravian meeting. And that was the end of the story that I was told as a Methodist, that his heart was strangely warmed, and suddenly we became a little different. We started the Methodist Church. What actually happened was a month after that, he was hanging out with the Moravians. And he went to a Moravian community in Holland, went to Marienborn and Herrenhut in Germany. In Marienborn, he was talking with Zinzendorf about what is this feeling? What is different in my experience that I now understand that assurance that you all share? And they had a long debate about what would be called sanctification these days. And they differed because Wesley said, so to me, this is a response. I feel the Holy Spirit in my life, and I feel more assured. I'll act more righteous, sin will not take a part of my life. Zinzendorf says, this is all the work of God. This is the work of God. It's not a response. This is God. Wesley says, we're arguing over semantics. Well, they did, and that's sort of where it split. Only at the end of his life did Wesley come back and visit a Moravian community. But they still had great respect for each other. And Wesley organized his church in many respects, admiring the Moravian system of choirs and support groups within the church. So you had Methodist societies where people were reinforcing each other's faith. There is an interesting story, of Methodist related, behind a very important person in the Southern Province history, Christian Lewis Wrights, who left the church briefly so he could fall in love, marry a girl, and apparently he must have gone to one revival or something, because he did a very strange thing in 1858. After August 13th, he felt the Spirit move upon him to preach. And he preached not just that day once, but twice. And within a week, he had a number of preaching services around at different stations in Wachovia. And by the end of the week, 41 new members had joined Free Bird Church. 41, which is a big number. But it's a really big number when you consider that the Moravian Church only added about 280 the previous 40 years. That's a big jump.
We have a relative here.
Yeah.
My great-grandfather.
So you know the story of which I speak.
I love hearing it again.
Yeah. It's a good story. The great thing about working here, there is an endless supply of great stories. It's nice to be connected to one. But as a Methodist, I could tell you more stories, but that's sort of carrying coals to Newcastle or sugar cake to Moravians. So I'm bringing Dewey's today, not sugar cake. And I wanted to tell you more about specifically what I've been doing work-wise and what I see are some challenges and opportunities for this place as it relates to its role in the church. Our official mission is very simple within the Book of Order. We are to be the official repository for the records of the church. And then you can spell out what those records are, but that's our task. And growing out of that task, we have become more over time, and as our facilities allow, open for research to folks who are doing family history or academics or doing, like I did, talking about the community, and to people in the general public who just want to know what we have. We have become, not necessarily by mandate, but by blessing. We started out with the good work of Adelaide Fries with her publication of the Records of the Moravians, which took so much of this material that would have been locked forever in German, inaccessible to modern readers, and she translated a whole bunch of stuff to get a word about the story of this place to the public. And we continue today with publications that over the last 20 years have told the story of this church in this place. And we've had, what's it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10 now, archivists since 1911. Our records go back, of course, to the start of Wachovia in 1752. We didn't have an archivist until 1911. It wasn't a paid position, however, until 1985. So all of that work that Miss Adelaide did was not recompensed. This was a labor of love for her. This picture's probably late 30s, I would guess, maybe early 40s. It's fun looking at the records downstairs, and you'll see a couple of these items are in yellow because that's our UV tinted light downstairs in our vault. Miss Adelaide's on her letterhead. And this was just before she got into her new office building. They had given her a warehouse up on Liberty Street. I have not seen a picture of that warehouse yet. But finally, after 30 years of producing all these things that got the word out about the church, these great records, they got her a place by taking over the Forstayer's house. And we'll see that in a second. Here's some other folks who, downstairs, you'll see their picture, Mary Creech, the Sievers, along with Miss Fries, Douglas Wrights, whose picture's right outside the archivist's office down the road. He came after Miss Fries. Tom Halpert, who was our first paid archivist in the late 80s. The budget, when it was an unpaid position, is a rather curious thing. I think, how did all this stuff get saved and preserved with this kind of a budget? This was in the year 54, 55. Here's the total budget. Translation work, $350. Clerical work, $250. Cleaning, $30. Postage, $15. Stationery, $15. Filing cases, $100. And we'll throw in another $100 to caulk the building to keep the dust from coming everywhere. That was the total budget for doing the archives in 1954. Here's the Forstayer's house that we moved into in 42. And this is the great building that we're in today, in 2001, the Archie K. Davis Center. Clearly, when you take your records from a warehouse for all those many years to that little cramped four-stairs house to here, there's a lot more you can do. And you have room to invite your friends to come over and talk about our past and to do a little research, and that's such a blessing for everybody. We have a beautiful reading room downstairs if you haven't had a chance to come over and use it. We have been blessed to have a dedicated group of folks. Yes, she's laughing at her picture. I did not put the picture up of you as a kid with the quilt. I just want to let you know I gave you a pass. Nicole is our assistant archivist, who's been a fantastic help to me the last few months. Grace Robinson is still working for us after these many years, transcribing our records, and she's been a great blessing. And of course, two folks who are instantly associated with this place. One of them sitting back here, Richard Starbuck, who's still working tirelessly on records of the Moravians, records of the Cherokee, Moravians among the Cherokee, and Daniel Cruz. In my job, this book has been almost a daily reference. Yes, if I got mad at you and threw this book, it would do serious damage. Yes, it's not the book I would take on your summer vacation. But if you're a Moravian and this book isn't in your house, you're missing an opportunity to know intimately the story of why your church is the way it is and how many good stories there are in here and stories that are waiting to be added to here as we grow this place over the years. And of course, Daniel did a fine book a few years ago about the early history of the Unitas Fraternity before it became the renewed Moravian Church. Two wonderful works that are a result of the research of people here. We haven't always had a welcoming attitude toward guests. I know we're talking to you about your Civil War work right now. We hadn't had the space for one thing, but in 48, this is the Bethlehem Archive attitude toward things. Look at the entrance fee. Those who are not members of the Moravian Church bear no responsibility for maintaining the archives, shall in every case be charged a project fee of $10. Now, I wasn't around in 48, but I think $10 in 48 was a pretty steep hello fee. Currently, we don't charge you to come to our place. We think we probably will do a little bit like, this is our, the brochure that I gave you is part of a series that we're trying to put together to tell in short order what it is we do, how we can help you learn about your history, your church, and tell the community what we do. So we're going to have some fees that won't start out, we'll still keep free, but we might say after a certain amount of time, we've got other things to do. If you need our time, can you please put a contribution in? Because we're not a public facility. But there's a series of things. We're going to come out with one soon about our French program. We've already got a publications brochure. And the goal of these things are to gather information in a short, clipped way, which will then be used to reformat our website. The biggest challenge for us mission-wise is not enough people know we're here. And nowadays, one of the ways people find out you're here is through a web page, because everybody's first look, I saw several of you checking your phone when you came in. That's the way we talk to each other nowadays. It's through our phone. And our first source for information is through our phone. And our website is not mobile friendly. So this week, I had a conversation with the web folks, and we already now have a dummy website that is mobile friendly. I would tell you, but I'd probably have to do something to you afterwards. So just know that it's coming. And it will be a great thing because all this information that we have available online will then be much more accessible to folks who use their phone every day. Right now, a very accessible way to learn about us is through our Facebook page. I don't know how many of you do Facebook. The only reason I did Facebook was to start watching what my kids were doing. Then I learned on Facebook, do not criticize what your kids are doing. Otherwise, you will not be their Facebook friends. We have nice, friendly content. It's wonderful things. We take this day in Southern Province history that's from this book, this Courage for the Future book. And we take that and we pair it with a picture that Nicole gets from our archive. And it's amazing the response that people have given. Here's what's happened. We left our Facebook page kind of live for a while as we celebrated the 250th of Salem last year. We went through a pause. Look what's happened to our traffic since May when we started doing this every day. We've gone from 300 users, 300 followers to over 700. And we have so many people coming in. They want to see what's next from the archive. It's great. I'm so envious of the Music Foundation. Y'all get to deal with a lot of living people on a regular basis. We have some wonderful stories, some wonderful things that we could talk to you about, but most of our clientele are dead. It's so great to have more and more living people connected to the work of the archives, because there is a lot of life here. This rest of this talk will parallel this brochure that I've given in front of you, and I want you to take with you, because these are the areas that will also be mimicked on our website to tell you where the baskets are of things that we do. Our churches that we represent, that we're tasked to keep the records for, there are 15,000 members, 55 churches. We've got manuscript German. How much manuscript German? Well, let's see. In 1954, the estimate was we had 15,000 pages that were in German script. How much of that is still yet to be transcribed out of and translated into English? I'm not quite sure, but it's a lot less than 15,000 now. The majority of what's left to be translated is personal correspondence that we have on file from folks who were church officials. Miss Adelaide did a fine job of getting the records, the official records of the church that were in German, mostly translated and accessible to folks. And then Daniel put out a couple more volumes of the records of the Moravians just in the last 15 years. So we've got it up to, I think, about, 1876 or something. It's so there's still some things to do, but that's blessedly in English for those who may be working with it. But what do we keep from churches? I was at Connoque last night. Connoque started very quickly for Moravian Church. They threw up a tent for worship services in May, and 6 months later they got into a sanctuary. But they were such an energy for wanting to have a church in that suburb. They had 230 folks come to a meeting at Trinity, and in short order they said, we're going to start having church out here. It was great. And they sent in notebooks, scrapbooks of their church. They do clippings. We've got, the Olin Mills Studio catalog. I will admit I did own one leisure suit in the 70s, only one. But they keep in their files. One of our challenges in keeping records is that we ask for paper in an age when people create records digitally. We ask every year for folks to send in their materials. And of the 55 churches, we might regularly get a dozen who send every year something. Now, some of those churches wait and send stuff in, but it will impair our ability in the future to tell those good stories about today if we don't have that material. I'm not naive enough to think that one of the reasons is we don't collect the way people create material digitally. So I'm going to talk to Paul Poiker when I go visit next week the Bethlehem Archives and say, what are some things we can do to help bridge that gap and make it easier for people to submit stuff and let us be a better steward of records? Friedberg has a fabulous facility at its church about its own history. Jimmy Snyder took me around and showed me. It's wonderful. It's a part of a cabinet. It's got artifacts. It's got papers. He's sending a couple boxes of paper to us. We're overdue. So it's great. But not every place has the ability to do that. And we want to be good stewards for the whole church by keeping our material. Family history is what brings most people to our facility these days. Ever since Roots in the 70s, there's actually a letter I found in the archives correspondence complaining about that TV series Roots. Everybody wants to know about their family history now. And it's been great. And now, thanks to the internet, you can plug into all sorts of resources to learn about your past. FindAgrave.com helped me figure out where a couple of my ancestors were buried I would never have gotten without that information. And we have a lot of information that is peculiar to Moravians, the Memoirs. For those outside the Moravian Church, a memoir is sort of a combination of an obituary, a testimony, and an autobiography. When Zinzendorf asked people to do this, he was wanting them to do it as part of a long, really Christian tradition of self-examination. That how has your relationship with God changed over time? Where do you see God working in your life? That's a long tradition within the faith community. What was unique about Zinzendorf was he said, As a church, we need to celebrate and remember all these lives. This is the hidden church within a church. We need these stories. These stories are worth keeping. And it's amazing. We have on file in our computers in the reading room 13,485 records of memoirs, most of which have been translated. I think there's about 500 was our guess that are still in German. But they're a wonderful resource that people can get not just a birth date and a death date, but information about how people lived their life, what made them come to have a better relationship in faith terms, and just all sorts of interesting stuff. We had that as a resource. You can go down to our computers right now. One of the things that's a challenge is that the computers are XP computers. If you're anything with computers, that's a long time ago. It took me 3 minutes to open one Excel file that was 32 kilobytes. If you know anything about computers, that's a long time. Prices of computers have come down. Maybe that's a challenge that we can help address by making that material more available in a quicker format. By the way, one of the resources on here, Wachovia Moravian, a magazine that ran from 1893 to 1970, talked about, when I say magazine, it was really a newsletter publication, about what was going on in this area, in the church. That's now accessible through our reading room computers and online. What about for folks who are not church members, who come to our place wanting to know what's here? That is the biggest problem, is telling them in a short form, what's here? You might expect a church place to keep church records. That's kind of a given. If you knew about the Moravian tradition of memoirs, you would know there's a lot of stuff here for family historians if you have connection to the Moravian Church. But what about beyond that? We don't do a great job of telling people all the different things we have here about local businesses, local newspapers, the large number of photographs we have in the collection. We have 20 notebooks down behind the front check-in desk that tell you what we have, but we don't have a short-form way of saying online what we have. One of the things I want to do is we've got a 3-page outline. One of the comments that Doug Wright's put in the 50s is that Miss Adelaide did a fantastic job of translating all this stuff and getting it where people could read it. On organizing and cataloging, not so much. Well, you have to pick your poison. She wanted to get the stories out. And we've spent a lot of time by having a new building in doing a better job of getting things organized, boxed. But we still have 70 or 80 boxes of stuff waiting right now to be boxed and stuff. There's a lot of things to do to catch up on that we can make ourselves better accessible. From the 3-page outline, there's a 12-page which starts to get more interesting because you start running by topics, and that's the kind of information that we hope to have available in short order on our new website, so you can at least get the sense of the baskets of stuff we have here if you might have an interest in our place. Photographs. What do we have here? We got pictures of how Moravians worked, office and shop, how they played, climbing up Pine Up Mountain. What are they doing with the bowling balls at Roaring Gap? I have no idea, but it does make a fun picture, doesn't it? Band, there's a Civil War band, you know about the Salem Regimental Band. We have stories of Moravians at war and at rest. This is quite interesting ephemera item, which got a lot of traffic on our Facebook, and when I saw that picture, I thought, that's really unusual. And that goes back at least to 1814, and it's very similar to a drawing when Zinzendorf passed. There were 100 people gathered in the room, so that smiling face was recorded among those who observed there. And this is from the Parenthood Archive. When I sent them that picture, I said, do you all have one of these? Yes, they do. And it's slightly different, you can tell. But the preservation quality, we got this through John Freeze Blair and his collection. Fascinating stuff that we have down there. Here's the Von Vliet sisters. Miss Amy, Miss Lou, who taught at Salem Academy. I mean, if you just went through our photographs, we have basically the history of photography in this place. We've got tintypes and glass slides and brownie pictures, and we don't have yet digital pictures, which is what we need to have storage, because when you go look for what's the record today, all your photos are going to be on your cell phone or on your digital camera. So we've got to figure out how to add that to our collection. We got the stories of how Moravians taught, and what they preached. I don't know if you know these 3 books. I give you a sample. One thing I think we ought to do a better job of is when folks do come use our place, especially the ones who aren't Moravian, we may not always agree with what they say, but sometimes they can give you, like we talked about, a different perspective on your own material. These are 3 books that were based on research done here, which have had some staying power. House of Diamond Hill, Kaya Miles was writing about the relationship between African Americans and the Cherokee at Chief Van's house, the Spring Place Mission area. Kaya just won a MacArthur Genius Grant a few years ago for that kind of work, talking about different cultures. A book that I used a lot, Michael Shirley, Congregation Town to Industrial City, about the transition from an apprentice economy to one that was factory-based. Fascinating about the Freeze family. And then Separate Canaan, John Sensback's book. John worked at Old Salem, and they're using that text now as they're doing their Hidden Town project, trying to identify on the ground places where slavery was extant in Salem. We had a group of folks come here from Duke and Guilford College, and they told me about a new book called Reformations. I'm always interested in a new book. This is 2016. And when I said something about, oh, you all are studying the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, and they all giggled, which shows how old school I am. Oh, there are many Reformations. Okay, the scientific one. Okay, I got it. It's a different thing. And also, if you say Reformation and Counter-Reformation, that's not quite right, because there's the Protestant Reformation and then there's the Catholic Reformation. So it's all a matter of perspective, right? So learning perspectives is interesting. And we open ourselves up next spring. We're going to have a group of theology students from the University of Göttingen who are going to stop here because they want to see what it was like for an exiled German-speaking community to be on the American frontier and their version of religion. We're going to have a dozen of them. It's going to be a fun conversation to have. And they'll get to read some of the stuff that's not translated and know, oh, I know what they're saying. Just had Katie Fall here. And her work is within the Moravian community, how we use our resources. Paul Boyker, of course, is up at Bethlehem. And Katie's got this Moravian memoir project, which we're learning about. She's doing a test run of trying to put up online all the memoirs that are not yet translated and trying to crowdsource a translation. Now, I don't know how successful that will be, given that folks who do translation for a living probably don't want to give it away for free. But the bigger goal is to generate through the Moravian Memoirs a group of data about who the Moravians were, to kind of make more visible in a different way who the invisible church was and still is. So I typed in the word Spock, which is a big name in this area, and lo and behold, where does Spock show up in Moravian Memoirs? Well, here in Germany at Parenthood, but you see how many of them are down here at our place. And so the more records that get added, it's the same thing in Moravian history as it would be in every other aspects of life. Big data. This is a big data source for studying Moravian history. A great possible project for us, we had Grant McAllister here last month. And Grant took this is Miss Free's version of the 1817 diary, which is in excerpts, it's not complete. He talked about, here's the October 31st entry, the memorial day for the beginning of Luther's Reformation 300 years ago was solemnly celebrated. If you were here last week, or last month, you knew there was a lot more to that. Fascinating detail. And what Grant and I have been talking about is, can we do a 58-page scholarly version in German of that year of the diary of Salem, and have experts from Germany and from the Americas, and from America talk about, in conference that will be held at Wake and here, what the Moravian experience was like. The word choice that they used in German. It will be a different way for us to look at our same material with a new perspective and an appreciation for the skills that were involved in creating those works. We have an ongoing relationship with Old Salem. That's a long story. When the Old Salem first got started, they took about 50,000 pages of our documents, and they are the biggest way by which people know our work product. And yet, if you go to the map of Old Salem in the ground, as you go across the bridge, we are airbrushed out of existence into the trees. If you go onto their map, which they have now put Moravian Church Archives up in the upper right corner, there are 3 black squares. Your guess as to which one of the black squares is, in fact, the Moravian Church Archives, but we have at least made it to their page, and I think growing and reinforcing the work of them and acknowledging us would be a big thing going forward. You know about our publication series. We just mentioned the Cherokee, who we're here in October with another $25,000 check to support records of Moravians among the Cherokees. They've raised over $360,000 for that project since 2008. It's a fabulous work. Now 7 volumes, working on volume 8 coming out. We already mentioned these two. Where do we get our budget from when it's not directed toward a product? And here's where I need friends' help, like you. 75% of the monies that support our work, and we have a budget of about $296,000 going forward, come from the church as organized church. Half of that from the Salem province as a whole, Southern province as a whole, and half from the Salem congregation. That leaves about 25% of our yearly operating budget must come from friends, individuals, who either with an annual gift or through a sustaining gift support us. As the church, all churches have had a time of shrinking in number. One of the challenges for us will be to figure out how to relate as an institution to society which seems to, this is a Pew 2012 study, reject religion in an increasingly way. How do we get them connected to a place and the history of a place and give meaning about faith and have faith inform and change lives? This place has its mission of collecting materials, but I really believe the better job we do of sharing those materials, of letting people know the stories that are here, it will help our church and churches and the community grow in an appreciation of faith and what faith can do for folks. There's an article Ross Stalvett put, the need for community. Community is something that has been front and center in the Moravian Church from the beginning in Herrenhood. And Daltha talks about that we live in a time that challenges our sense of institutions, because institutions in religious sense were dependent on society. And society supported religion. Now we live in a time when society doesn't seem to care much about religion. So the institutions that were built in their framework dependent on a society supporting them, they're not doing that hot. And then beyond that, this Reformation time, this arguing among each other, is about to devolve into stories of, well, we're going to differ with each other, and the differences will be about how many angels are on the head of a pin, or like importance, because he says it does not matter some of these differences that have haunted, especially the Protestant church, about every time there's a division that we split. We need to stand together in community of faith. And the last thing is, we're in this very hyper-individualistic time. Everybody's on their cell phone. I spent the last couple of years more time than I wished around young people who were supposedly in a place of social interaction. And their social interaction is they would go to some place and everybody would pull out a phone. And they do community hyper-individualistically. You just have to be with each other. The great thing about this archive is it allows us to be with those who were here before us. The God that they worshipped and knew as the great I am never became a great I was, and doesn't become a great I was from our perspective simply because we're reading about them in a past tense. The experience of faith, the abiding presence, that still warm feeling in your heart, that assurance that allows us to be with each other in tough times, that's still a living thing. This place helps us tell that, and we want to help tell it in a better way, and we appreciate any help you can give us to do that. Thank you.